The auctioneer's hammer cracked through the dusty air of Prescott, Arizona territory, and Deanna Zimmerman felt her stomach twist as another woman stepped off the wooden platform with tears streaming down her face, sold to work in a saloon for the next 3 years. The year was 1883, and Deanna had learned quickly that desperation wore many faces in this harsh land, but none quite as cruel as the indentured labor auctions held monthly in the town square. She stood in a line of 7 women, most of them widows or orphans with nowhere else to turn, waiting to have their labor sold to the highest bidder for terms ranging from 1 to 5 years. The sun beat down mercilessly on her dark hair, and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath the worn gray dress that had once belonged to her mother. Deanna had arrived in Prescott 3 weeks earlier after her father died of consumption in Kansas, leaving her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. She had come west hoping to find work as a seamstress or teacher, but positions were scarce, and her money had run out faster than she could have imagined. When the boarding house owner threatened to have her arrested for unpaid rent, a thin woman with calculating eyes had approached her with what seemed like a solution. Sign the papers, work off the debt, and in a few years she would be free with money in her pocket. Deanna had been naive enough to believe it, desperate enough to sign without reading carefully. Now she understood she had sold herself into bondage, legal perhaps, but bondage nonetheless. The auctioneer, a portly man named Graves with tobacco stains on his vest, called her forward. Her legs felt wooden as she climbed the 3 steps to the platform. The crowd gathered before her consisted mostly of men, ranch owners seeking cooks and laundresses, saloon keepers looking for serving girls, and a few merchants needing help. They did not want to pay fair wages. Deanna kept her eyes down, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying to maintain whatever dignity she could muster. Next we have Miss Deanna Zimmerman, age 22, literate and in good health, Graves announced, his voice carrying across the square. The contract is for kitchen work, 3 years minimum term. Starting bid is $50. A heavy-set man near the front raised his hand. Deanna recognized him as the owner of the Lucky Strike Saloon, a rough establishment known for brawls and worse. Her heart sank. $50 from Mr. Carlton, Graves called. Do I hear 60? Silence stretched for a moment, then another hand rose from the back of the crowd. Deanna could not see who it belonged to. 60 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 70? Carlton scowled and raised his hand again. 75. The bidding continued, climbing in increments that made Deanna feel simultaneously worthless and far too valuable. She was being sold like livestock, her next 3 years going to whoever had the deepest pockets. The price reached $125 with Carlton still in the lead. Deanna felt sick. She had heard stories about what happened to women who worked in places like the Lucky Strike. $125 going once, Graves called, raising his hammer. $200. The voice came from the back, deep and steady, and the crowd murmured in surprise. $200 was more than kitchen help was worth, more than most of these auctions brought in total. Deanna finally looked up, searching for the source of the bid. A man stood at the edge of the crowd, tall and lean in dusty work clothes and a worn hat that shadowed his face. Even from a distance, Deanna could see the determined set of his shoulders. Carlton turned to glare at the newcomer. That's too damn much for kitchen work. You got money to burn, cowboy. $200, the man repeated, ignoring the question. His voice carried a quiet authority that silenced the muttering crowd. Graves looked between Carlton and the stranger. That is the bid on the floor. Do I hear 210? Carlton spat in the dust and shook his head, shoving his way through the crowd toward the saloon. Graves waited a moment longer, then brought down his hammer with finality. Sold for $200 to Mr. Ethan Hunter. Diana's knees nearly buckled with relief that she would not be going to the lucky strike, but fear quickly replaced it. Who was this Ethan Hunter, and why had he paid so much? What would he expect in return for such a sum? She watched as he made his way through the parting crowd toward the auctioneer's table to complete the transaction. As he drew closer, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were clean but mended, his boots scuffed from hard use. He did not look like a man who had $200 to spare. Ethan counted out the money carefully, handing over a mix of bills and coins that Graves examined with greedy attention. Then the auctioneer produced the contract, a legal document that gave Ethan ownership of Diana's labor for the next 3 years. The word ownership made her skin crawl, even though she knew it was not quite slavery. She would receive room and board, and a small sum at the end of her term if she completed it satisfactorily. But for 3 years, she would have no freedom, no choices of her own. Graves handed Ethan the signed contract and gestured for Diana to step down from the platform. She descended carefully, her legs still unsteady, and found herself standing face to face with the man who had just purchased her future. Ethan Hunter had gray eyes that held more kindness than she expected, though they also carried a deep weariness. He studied her for a moment, then glanced at the contract in his hand. Without a word, he took her elbow gently and guided her away from the auction platform, through the dispersing crowd, toward a hitching post where a sturdy bay horse waited. Diana found her voice as they walked. "Mr. Hunter, I should tell you I am a decent cook, but I have never worked on a ranch. If you expect, just keep walking," he said quietly, not unkindly. His hand on her elbow was gentle but insistent. They reached his horse and Ethan finally stopped. He pulled the contract from his pocket and looked at it again, his jaw tight. Then he did something Diana would remember for the rest of her life. He tore the document cleanly in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter to the dusty ground. Diana stared at the torn paper, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. "What are you doing? That is a legal contract. You just paid." Ethan turned to face her fully, and she saw something fierce and protective in his eyes. He leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. "You are free." The words did not make sense. Diana looked from his face to the torn contract and back again. "I do not understand. You paid $200. I know what I paid." Ethan pulled a small leather pouch from his saddlebag and pressed it into her hands. She could feel coins inside more than a few. "There is enough there for a room at the boarding house for 2 months and stage fare to California if you want it, or Denver, anywhere but here." Diana's hands trembled as she held the pouch. "Why would you do this? You do not know me. That money was everything I had," Ethan finished. "Saved for 5 years to buy breeding stock for my ranch. But I reckon your freedom is worth more than a few head of cattle." Tears sprang to Diana's eyes, hot and unexpected. In the 3 weeks since she arrived in Prescott, since her father died, since the world had turned cold and cruel, no one had shown her an ounce of kindness without expecting something in return. "I cannot accept this. It is too much. It is done." Ethan stepped back, putting distance between them. "The contract is void. You do not owe me anything, and you do not have to work for anyone unless you choose to." Diana clutched the pouch, her mind racing. 2 months of safety, the possibility of a new start somewhere else. It was more than she had dared hope for an hour ago. But as she looked at this man who had just sacrificed 5 years of savings for a stranger, she felt something shift in her chest. "Why?" she whispered. Why would you give up everything for someone you do not even know? Ethan's expression grew distant, shadowed with old pain. 3 years ago, my sister stood on that same platform. She was 16, an orphan after our parents died of fever. I was working a cattle drive in Texas, did not even know she was in trouble until I got back and found out she had been sold to a ranch up north. By the time I tracked her down and bought out her contract, she had been there for 8 months. He paused, his voice roughening. She was not the same girl I left behind. What they did to her, what she endured, it broke something in her spirit. Deanna's heart clenched. Where is she now? Montana, married to a good man who treats her right, but she still has nightmares. Ethan met Deanna's eyes again. I swore that day that if I ever had the chance to save another woman from that platform, I would do it. I have been saving for those cattle for 5 years, and I will save for 5 more if I have to. But I could not walk away and let you end up in that saloon or worse. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the square, and Deanna realized that the auction had moved on to farming equipment and livestock. The other women who had been sold were gone, led away by their new masters to begin their terms of servitude. She alone stood free, holding a pouch of coins that represented this cowboy's entire future. I cannot take this, Deanna said again, though her voice lacked conviction. Your ranch, your plans. You need that money more than I do. My ranch will survive. I have been working it for 3 years with nothing but my own 2 hands and a stubborn streak. I will manage. Ethan gathered his horse's reins. But you need to get off the street before Graves or Carlton realize what happened to that contract. Men like that do not take kindly to losing property they think they bought. Deanna glanced back toward the auction platform where Graves was haggling over a plow. Ethan was right. If they discovered the contract had been destroyed, they might try to claim she still owed her term of service. The law in the Arizona Territory was often flexible depending on who had money and influence. Come on, Ethan said, beginning to walk his horse down the street. I will make sure you get settled at the boarding house safely. Deanna fell into step beside him, her mind still reeling. They walked in silence for a block, past the general store and the land office, toward the residential edge of town where the boarding houses clustered. The same boarding house where she had accumulated the debt that led to the auction platform now seemed like a sanctuary. Mrs. Henley owns the place you are staying, Ethan asked. Yes, though I doubt she will be pleased to see me. I owe her 3 weeks' rent. That will be covered in what I gave you. Ethan glanced at her. Pay her what you owe, secure a room for as long as you need, and then decide what you want to do. There is enough there for food and necessities while you figure out your next step. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. Deanna had called it home for 3 miserable weeks, watching her money dwindle and her options narrow. Now, with the pouch heavy in her hand, it looked different. Not a trap, but a temporary shelter while she rebuilt her life. Ethan stopped at the gate. Will you be all right from here? Deanna turned to face him, this stranger who had given her back her future. In the slanting afternoon light, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the honest weariness of a man who worked hard for everything he had. He had just given it all away for her. Mr. Hunter, she began, then stopped, unsure how to express what she felt. Gratitude seemed too small a word. I do not know how to thank you. No thanks needed. Ethan touched the brim of his hat. Just promise me you will use that freedom well. Do not let anyone take it from you again. I promise. Deanna hesitated, then asked, Your ranch, where is it? About 8 miles north in the high country. Small place, more hope than profit right now. He smiled slightly, and it transformed his serious face. But it is mine, such as it is. Deanna made a decision in that moment, one that surprised her even as the words left her mouth. I meant what I said. I am a decent cook and I can clean and mend and manage a household. If you need help on your ranch, I would be willing to work for fair wages. Not as an indentured servant, but as a paid employee. Ethan's eyebrows rose. You do not owe me anything, Miss Zimmerman. That is the whole point of what I just did. I know I do not owe you, but you just spent all your savings and you clearly run that ranch alone. You could use help, and I need honest work. Deanna straightened her shoulders. I would rather work for a man who believes in freedom than take charity, no matter how kindly meant. For a long moment, Ethan studied her, and Deanna wondered if she had offended him. Then he shook his head slowly, that slight smile returning. You are either very brave or very foolish, offering to work for a man who just proved he has no business sense whatsoever. Perhaps a bit of both, Deanna admitted. But I mean it. I need to earn my way and you need help. It seems practical. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, considering. The ranch is rough, Miss Zimmerman. One-room cabin, leaky roof, more rocks than grass in some pastures. I have been living on beans and jerky for so long I have forgotten what real cooking tastes like. It is not fit accommodation for a lady. I have not felt much like a lady lately, Deanna said quietly. And I have slept in worse places than a cabin with a leaky roof. If you are willing to pay fair wages and treat me with respect, I will work hard for you. The horse nickered softly, and Ethan stroked its neck absently while he thought. Deanna could see him weighing the offer, measuring it against whatever code of honor had driven him to spend his savings on her freedom in the first place. Fair wages, he said finally. Room and board, plus $15 a month. You can leave whenever you want, no contract, no obligation. And I give you my word as a gentleman, such as I am, that you will be safe and respected under my roof. $15 a month was generous, more than most domestic help earned. Deanna nodded. That is more than fair. When do we leave? You should take a few days, make sure this is what you want. Talk to people in town about me if you like. I have a reputation for being honest if a bit standoffish. Ethan shifted his weight. This is not a decision to make lightly. Mr. Hunter, 2 hours ago I was standing on an auction block waiting to be sold. You gave me my freedom back. If I choose to use that freedom to work for you on my own terms, that is my decision to make. Deanna met his eyes steadily. I would like to leave in the morning if you are willing. I have nothing keeping me in this town. Ethan was quiet for another moment, then nodded. All right, I will come by at first light with a wagon. Bring whatever belongings you have. He tipped his hat again. Until tomorrow, Miss Zimmerman. Deanna watched him swing into his saddle with easy grace and ride back down the street toward the livery stable. Only when he was out of sight did she realize her heart was pounding. She had just committed to living on an isolated ranch with a man she had known for less than an hour. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt something that had been absent for weeks. Hope. Mrs. Henley was shocked when Deanna walked through the front door and counted out the back rent in silver coins. The landlady, a sharp-featured woman who smelled of camphor and disapproval, examined each coin as if expecting them to vanish. I heard you were at the auction today, Mrs. Henley said, her tone making it clear she knew exactly why. Did not think I would see you again. My circumstances have improved, Deanna said evenly. I would like to keep my room for one more night. Mrs. Henley pocketed the money quickly. Room 3 is still yours, though I will be renting it out tomorrow, leaving town. Yes. Deanna did not offer more information, and after a moment of strained silence, she climbed the stairs to her small room. The space was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, with a single window overlooking the dusty street. Deanna's belongings fit in a carpet bag her mother had embroidered 20 years ago. 2 dresses, a change of undergarments, a Bible, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. It was a pitiful collection, the sum total of 22 years of life. She sat on the bed and counted the remaining coins from Ethan's pouch. After paying Mrs. Henley and setting aside money for supplies, she still had more than enough for stage fare to California or Denver, just as Ethan had promised. She could leave Prescott, start fresh in a city where no one knew about the auction, find respectable work as a seamstress or shop girl. But the thought of walking away from Ethan Hunter, of never repaying his incredible kindness, sat wrong in her heart. More than that, something about him called to her. The sadness in his eyes when he spoke of his sister, the quiet strength in his voice when he said, "You are free," the way he had sacrificed everything without hesitation. Deanna had learned not to trust easily, but every instinct told her that Ethan was a good man in a world that seemed short on them. She repacked her carpet bag and lay down on the narrow bed, watching the last light fade from the window. Tomorrow she would leave Prescott and everything familiar, trading the known misery of town life for the uncertainty of an isolated ranch. It should have frightened her more than it did. Ethan arrived exactly at first light, driving a weather-beaten wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. Deanna was waiting on the boarding house porch with her carpet bag, having risen early to wash and rebraid her hair. She had put on her better dress, a faded blue calico that had been her Sunday best before her father died. "Morning," Ethan called, setting the brake and climbing down. "Sleep well?" "Well enough." Deanna handed him her bag, which he stowed in the wagon bed with an ease that spoke of long familiarity with manual labor. "I hope I did not keep you waiting." "Not at all. I had to pick up supplies anyway." He gestured to the crates and sacks filling the wagon. "Flour, beans, salt pork, the necessities. Figured if I was going to have a proper cook, I should provide proper ingredients." Deanna smiled despite herself. "Salt pork and beans are better than nothing. I can make do." Ethan helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand steady and respectful, then climbed up beside her. The seat was narrow, forcing them to sit close enough that Deanna could feel the warmth of his arm near hers. He released the brake and clicked to the horses, and they lurched into motion. Prescott was barely stirring as they drove through the main street. A few shopkeepers were opening shutters, and the smell of baking bread drifted from the hotel kitchen. Deanna looked back once at the town that had nearly consumed her, then turned her face forward toward whatever lay ahead. The road north climbed steadily out of the valley, winding through stands of juniper and pine. The morning air was cool and clear, fragrant with sage. Ethan drove in comfortable silence, handling the reins with relaxed competence while the horses plodded along at a steady pace. After an hour, Deanna asked, "How long have you had your ranch?" 3 years this October. Homesteaded 160 acres under the federal act. Had to prove up on it, build a dwelling, cultivate the land. Ethan's eyes stayed on the road. "First year nearly broke me. Second year was drought. This third year is looking better, but I am still one bad season away from losing it all. No family to help you, just my sister, and she has her own life now. Our parents died when I was 23 and she was 15. Fever took them both in the same week." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Deanna heard the old grief beneath it. "I tried to keep Sarah with me, but I was working cattle drives, gone for months at a time. She ended up in Prescott with a family that promised to look after her in exchange for help around their house. Turned out they sold her contract the moment I left for Texas." Deanna absorbed this, understanding more about why he had bid on her freedom. "You said she is married now, to a rancher up in Montana Territory." Good man named William, treats her like a queen. They have a daughter almost 2 years old now. Ethan's expression softened. Sarah writes me every few months. She seems happy as she can be with what she went through. You see her often, not as often as I would like. Montana is a long way from Arizona. He glanced at Deanna. What about you? Any family? Both parents are gone now. Father died of consumption 6 weeks ago in Kansas. My mother passed when I was 17. Deanna twisted her hands in her lap. I was an only child and my parents were older when they had me. No aunts or uncles that I know of. So you came west alone. I thought I could find work as a seamstress or teacher. I can read and write, do figures. Back home I helped at the schoolhouse sometimes. Deanna laughed bitterly. I was so naive. I thought civilization would be the same everywhere. The West is not kind to women alone, Ethan said quietly. It is not kind to anyone, really, but especially not to women. Too many men see that as an opportunity rather than something to protect. They fell silent again, but it was a companionable quiet, the kind shared by people who understood hardship. The road grew rougher as they climbed higher into the pine country, and Ethan had to guide the horses carefully around ruts and rocks. Around mid-morning, they stopped beside a clear stream to water the horses and eat a simple meal of bread and cheese that Ethan had brought. Deanna sat on a flat rock by the water and watched him tend to the animals with patient efficiency. Everything about his movements spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin, confident in his abilities without being arrogant. How much farther? She asked. Another 2 hours or so. The ranch is in a high valley, good grass and water but difficult to access. That is part of why I could afford to homestead it. Ethan joined her by the stream with his own piece of bread. Previous owner gave up after one winter and never came back. Hard winters up here, hard enough. Snow from November through March, sometimes April. We will need to stock up on supplies before the pass is close. Make sure we have enough firewood laid in. He paused. That is assuming you are still planning to stay once you see the place. Deanna looked at him directly. Mr. Hunter, I may have made some foolish decisions recently, but I do not go back on my word. I said I would work for you, and I will. Something shifted in his expression, a tension releasing. I appreciate that, Miss Zimmerman, and please call me Ethan. If we are going to be living under the same roof, formality seems excessive. Then you should call me Deanna, she smiled. Miss Zimmerman makes me feel like a schoolteacher. Diana, Ethan repeated, and the way he said her name, careful and respectful, made something warm unfurl in her chest. It suits you. They finished their meal and continued north, climbing ever higher into country that grew more beautiful and remote with each mile. Deanna saw elk grazing in distant meadows and hawks circling overhead. The vastness of it all, the raw, untamed wilderness, both thrilled and intimidated her. Finally, as the sun approached its zenith, Ethan guided the wagon off the main road onto a narrow track that wound through tall pines. Almost there, he said. The track opened into a high valley cradled between mountain ridges, and Deanna caught her first glimpse of Ethan's ranch. He had not exaggerated its humble nature. A small log cabin sat at the edge of a clearing, its roof covered with wooden shingles that did indeed look like they might leak. A rough barn stood nearby, more of a three-sided shed than a proper structure, and a corral made of split rails enclosed a patch of bare ground. Beyond the buildings, the valley stretched out in a patchwork of meadow and forest, with a stream glinting silver in the sunlight. It was rough and primitive and absolutely beautiful. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin and set the brake. Welcome to the Hunter Ranch, such as it is. I know it is not much. It is perfect, Deanna interrupted, and she meant it. After weeks of feeling trapped and powerless, The sight of this wild, free place made her want to weep with relief. "Truly, Ethan, it is wonderful." He looked at her with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "You are either being very kind or you have a different definition of wonderful than most people. I have spent the last 3 weeks in a boarding house room the size of a closet, listening to drunks fight in the street every night. This is paradise by comparison." Deanna climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help, eager to explore. "Show me everything." Ethan's smile, when it came, was genuine and unguarded, transforming his whole face. "All right then. Welcome home, Deanna." The word home resonated in her chest as Ethan gave her a tour of the property. The cabin was indeed small, essentially one large room with a stone fireplace at one end and a rope bed in the corner. A rough table with 2 chairs occupied the center, and shelves lined one wall, holding a sparse collection of dishes and supplies. Everything was clean but worn, the possessions of a man who owned only what he needed and nothing more. "I will sleep in the barn," Ethan said immediately. "The cabin is yours. I have been meaning to build an addition anyway, separate sleeping quarters, just have not had the time or materials yet." Deanna surveyed the cabin's single bed. "That seems impractical. You built this place, you should not be displaced from it." "I am not about to ask you to sleep in a barn." Ethan's tone was firm. "I will make do just fine, done it before during roundups. Then we will work on building that addition," Deanna said practically, "but I insist on helping. I am stronger than I look." Ethan showed her the root cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin, the spring that provided fresh water, the vegetable garden that had gone mostly to weeds in his absence. The barn held a milk cow, 2 additional horses, and a few chickens roosting in the rafters. "The cow is named Bess, contrary but a decent milker," Ethan explained. "The chickens come and go as they please, but they usually leave eggs in that nesting box if you check every morning." Deanna made mental notes, already planning how to organize the household, what supplies they would need, how to make the rough cabin more livable. The practical tasks grounded her, gave her a sense of purpose that had been missing since her father died. They spent the afternoon unloading the wagon and putting away supplies. Deanna claimed the cabin's interior as her domain, organizing the shelves and planning meals while Ethan tended to the animals and made repairs to the corral fence. They worked in parallel, separate but aware of each other, settling into an easy rhythm. As evening approached, Deanna made her first meal in the cabin. Salt pork fried with wild onions she found growing by the stream, beans flavored with a precious bit of molasses, and cornbread baked in the fireplace's Dutch oven. It was simple food, but when Ethan sat down at the table and took his first bite, his expression was almost reverent. "This is the best meal I have had in 3 years," he said seriously. Deanna laughed. "Then you have been living worse than I imagined. It is just beans and pork." "It is food cooked with care instead of necessity. There is a difference." Ethan ate with the focused attention of a truly hungry man. "I am already getting my money's worth." The mention of money made Deanna remember what his freedom had cost. She set down her fork. "Ethan, about those cattle you were planning to buy, how long before you can save up again?" he shrugged. "Few years, depending on how the ranch does. I sell timber sometimes when the logging camps are buying. Take odd jobs when I can, I will manage. I want to help." Deanna met his eyes across the table. "Not just with cooking and cleaning, but with the ranch work. Whatever needs doing, I can learn." "Deanna, I did not bring you here to work yourself to exhaustion. You did not bring me here at all, I chose to come." She leaned forward. "Let me help you rebuild what you spent on me, please. I need to do something more than cook and clean to feel right about this." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we go slow and you tell me if anything is too much. Deal, deal." They shook hands across the table, and the touch of his calloused palm against hers sent an unexpected jolt through Deanna. She pulled back quickly, suddenly aware of how isolated they were, how alone. But Ethan's expression remained respectful, even as something flickered in his eyes that might have been the same awareness. After dinner, Ethan excused himself to tend the animals one final time before dark while Deanna cleaned up. She washed the dishes in a basin of heated water, then stepped outside to throw out the dishwater. The sun had set behind the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and the silence was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant call of an owl. Deanna stood for a moment, breathing in the peace of it. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been standing on an auction platform, terrified and powerless. Now she stood in front of a rough cabin in the wilderness, free and purposeful, with a future that was hers to shape. Ethan emerged from the barn and saw her standing there. He walked over, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Everything all right?" "Everything is more than all right," Deanna said softly. "Thank you, Ethan, for all of this." He looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "You are earning your keep with that cooking alone. You know it is more than that." Deanna turned to face him fully. "You gave me back my life. I will never forget that." In the dying light, Ethan's face was hard to read, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. "Then use it well, Deanna. That is all the thanks I need." He bid her good night and headed to the barn with a bedroll and blanket. Deanna watched him go, then returned to the cabin and barred the door. The rope bed was surprisingly comfortable, stuffed with fresh straw and covered with worn but clean quilts. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness night, and felt safer than she had in months. The days that followed fell into a pattern that was both demanding and satisfying. Deanna rose before dawn to milk Bess and collect eggs, then prepared breakfast while Ethan tended to the horses. After eating, they would work together on whatever task Ethan had planned for the day: mending fences, cutting firewood, clearing rocks from the pastures, or hunting for meat. Ethan was a patient teacher, showing Deanna how to handle an axe, how to read the weather signs in the clouds, how to tell which plants were edible and which were poison. She learned that he had spent his youth working on ranches across Texas and New Mexico before homesteading in Arizona, and that knowledge showed in everything he did. He wasted no motion, made no unnecessary effort, approaching each task with calm efficiency. For her part, Deanna proved to be a quick learner and harder worker than Ethan expected. She did not complain about blisters or sore muscles, just wrapped her hands and kept going. When they worked side by side, splitting logs or stacking firewood, Ethan found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the determination in her face, the way she pushed her hair back when it fell into her eyes, the quiet satisfaction when she mastered a new skill. In the evenings, after supper, they would sit by the fireplace and talk. Deanna told him about growing up in Kansas, about her father who had been a clerk before consumption weakened him, about the books she had read, and the dreams she had harbored of becoming a teacher. Ethan spoke less about himself, but Deanna gradually pieced together his story. A hard childhood on a failing ranch, parents who worked themselves to early graves, a sister he had tried and failed to protect, and the guilt that drove him even now. "You cannot blame yourself for what happened to Sarah," Deanna said one evening about 2 weeks into her stay. "You were trying to provide for both of you. I should have been there." Ethan poked at the fire, sending sparks drifting up the chimney. I should have taken her with me or found better people to leave her with. I failed her when she needed me most. But you saved her when you could. You bought out her contract, made sure she found a good husband, gave her a chance at happiness. Deanna leaned forward. That is what matters. Not the mistakes you made, but how you made them right. Ethan looked at her, firelight casting shadows across his face. Is that why you think I bid on you? To make up for failing Sarah? I think you bid on me because you are a good man who could not stand by and watch someone suffer when you had the power to stop it. Deanna held his gaze. And I think you carry too much guilt for things that were not your fault. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. Ethan reached out and almost touched her hand, then pulled back, standing abruptly. It is getting late. I should let you get some rest. He left for the barn, and Deanna sat alone by the fire, her hand tingling where his had almost touched. The awareness between them was growing stronger each day, an undercurrent to every conversation and shared task. She told herself it was gratitude she felt, nothing more, but her heart knew she was lying. The first real test came 3 weeks after Diana's arrival, when a late summer storm rolled over the mountains with unexpected violence. Deanna woke to thunder that shook the cabin walls and rain hammering on the roof like bullets. Within minutes, she discovered that Ethan had not exaggerated about the leaky roof. Water dripped through in half a dozen places, forcing her to scramble for pots and pans to catch it. She was debating whether to make a run for the barn to get Ethan when the cabin door burst open and he appeared, soaked to the skin and carrying an armload of canvas tarps. "The barn is flooding," he shouted over the thunder. "We need to move the supplies and animals to higher ground." Deanna did not hesitate. She grabbed her shawl and followed him out into the deluge. The rain was shockingly cold, driven by wind that threatened to knock her off her feet. Together they worked in the near darkness, hauling feed sacks and tools from the barn to the cabin, then leading the protesting animals to the shelter of the trees on higher ground. Lightning split the sky, and in its flash, Deanna saw a wall of water rushing down the stream bed toward them. "Ethan, the stream," he turned, saw what was coming and grabbed her hand. "Run!" They sprinted for the cabin as the flood surge hit, transforming the peaceful stream into a roaring torrent that swallowed the lower pasture. They made it inside just as water began lapping at the cabin's foundation, and Ethan slammed the door against the storm. Both of them stood gasping in the center of the cabin, soaked and muddy, while rain continued to pour through the roof and thunder rattled the windows. Deanna started to laugh, helpless giggles that turned into full-bodied laughter at the absurdity of it all. After a moment, Ethan joined her, and they stood there laughing like children while the storm raged around them. "So much for my homestead," Ethan said finally, wiping water from his face. "At this rate, I will be starting over again come morning." "We will be starting over," Deanna corrected. She was shivering now, the cold rain having soaked through to her skin. "Together." Ethan seemed to notice her shivering for the first time. "You need to get out of those wet clothes." "I will turn around while you change." He moved to face the fireplace while Deanna quickly stripped off her soaked dress and undergarments, wrapping herself in a blanket from the bed. "All right," she said when she was decent. Ethan turned back, his own clothes still dripping, and Deanna saw him shiver. "Your turn," she said. "I will keep my back turned. I should go back to the barn in this storm. Do not be foolish. Change into dry clothes and we will wait it out together." After a moment's hesitation, Ethan retrieved a change of clothes from the pack he kept in the cabin and moved behind the bed for privacy. Deanna heard the wet sounds of fabric being peeled away, and she kept her eyes firmly on the fire, trying not to think about what he looked like beneath those clothes. When he emerged, Dressed in dry trousers and a flannel shirt, they both settled near the fireplace with blankets wrapped around their shoulders. The storm showed no signs of abating, and water continued to drip into the strategically placed pots and pans. "I am sorry," Ethan said after a while. "I promised you room and board, and I am delivering a flooded cabin with a leaky roof. You also promised me freedom and respect, and you have delivered both in abundance." Deanna shifted closer to the fire's warmth. "Everything else is just details." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm. Eventually, Deanna felt her eyes growing heavy, the exhaustion of fighting the flood catching up with her. She must have dozed off, because she woke sometime later to find herself leaning against Ethan's shoulder, his arm around her to keep her from falling. She sat up quickly, embarrassed. "I am sorry. I did not mean to. It is all right," Ethan said, but his voice was strained. "You were cold and tired. It did not mean anything, but it had meant something." Deanna could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way he would not quite meet her eyes. The awareness that had been building between them for weeks had crystallized in that moment of innocent contact, and they both knew it. The storm finally broke just before dawn, and they emerged from the cabin to survey the damage. The lower pasture was underwater, the stream had jumped its banks, and the vegetable garden was buried in mud. But the cabin and barn still stood, the animals were safe, and most of the supplies had been saved. "Could have been worse," Ethan said, surveying the mess. Deanna thought about how easily the flood could have swept them away, how quickly disaster could strike in this wild place, and how glad she was to have survived it with Ethan at her side. "Much worse," she agreed. They spent the next 2 days cleaning up, mucking out mud and repairing damage. It was hard, dirty work, but they did it together, and Deanna found herself watching Ethan when he was not looking, admiring the strength in his arms, the determination in his jaw, the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. She was falling in love with him. The realization came quietly, without fanfare, as natural as breathing. She loved his gentleness and his strength, his quiet honor and his terrible guilt, the way he had given everything for her freedom and asked nothing in return. But loving him and telling him were two different things. Deanna had no idea if Ethan felt the same way, or if his kindness was simply who he was, extended equally to everyone. She had seen how carefully he maintained distance between them, how he never touched her unnecessarily, how he retreated to the barn every night without fail. Perhaps he saw her as a responsibility, nothing more. The thought hurt more than Deanna wanted to admit. As September faded into October, the days grew shorter and the nights colder. Ethan began preparations for winter in earnest, cutting and stacking cords of firewood, hunting deer and elk to smoke for meat, making the long trip to Prescott for final supplies before the snows came. Deanna went with him on that supply run, her first time back in town since the auction. She felt eyes on them as they walked through the streets, heard the whispers. The woman from the auction platform, now living alone with the cowboy who bought and freed her. The gossip was inevitable, but Deanna held her head high and ignored it. Mrs. Henley saw them at the general store and approached with false sweetness. "Miss Zimmerman, I heard you were working for Mr. Hunter now. How fortunate that you found employment so quickly after that unpleasantness." "Very fortunate," Deanna agreed coolly. "Mr. Hunter has been nothing but kind and respectful, I am sure." Mrs. Henley's eyes were calculating. "Still, people do talk. A young, unmarried woman living alone with a bachelor. It is not quite proper, is it?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "Miss Zimmerman is my employee, Mrs. Henley, and her reputation is spotless. I would appreciate it if you would help keep it that way by not spreading gossip." Mrs. Henley sniffed and retreated, but the damage was done. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Deanna could feel the weight of disapproving stares. "I am sorry," Ethan said quietly. "I did not think about how this would look to people in town." "I do not care what they think," Deanna said, and she meant it. "Their opinions mean nothing to me. They might matter if you want to find other work someday or marry. A damaged reputation follows a woman." Ethan helped her into the wagon seat. "I do not want to be the cause of that." Deanna looked at him sharply. "Are you suggesting I should leave?" "No." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. Ethan took a breath and continued more calmly. "No, I am not suggesting that at all. I just want you to be aware of the consequences of staying. I am aware, and I am staying." Deanna arranged her skirts, not looking at him. "Unless you want me to go." "I do not want you to go," Ethan said softly. "That is the problem." He did not elaborate, just climbed into the wagon and drove them out of town in silence. Diana's heart pounded as she replayed his words in her mind. What did he mean? That was the problem. Did he share her feelings, or was he simply concerned about propriety? The question haunted her during the long drive home, but she could not find the courage to ask. Instead, they talked of practical things. Supplies for winter, repairs needed on the barn, plans for expanding the cabin. Safe topics that kept them from addressing the growing tension between them. October brought the first real snowfall, a light dusting that melted by noon, but served as warning of harder weather to come. Ethan worked from dawn until well past dark, determined to finish the cabin addition before winter set in properly. Deanna helped where she could, holding boards while he hammered, mixing mortar for chinking, sewing canvas covers for the windows. The addition took shape slowly. One room attached to the cabin's east side with its own door and a small window. It was meant to be Ethan's room, giving Deanna privacy in the main cabin, but as it neared completion, Diana found herself dreading its finish. Once Ethan moved into his own space, the enforced proximity that had defined their evenings would end. No more sitting by the fire together, no more quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. The night before Ethan planned to move his belongings into the addition, Diana made a special dinner using precious supplies they had been saving. Roasted chicken, potatoes fried with wild onions, biscuits with butter and honey. It was a feast by their standards, and Ethan praised every bite. "What is the occasion?" he asked, helping himself to a second biscuit. "No occasion. I just wanted to make something nice." Deanna poured him more coffee from the pot on the fire. "You have worked so hard on the addition. You deserve a proper meal." Ethan set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "Deanna, I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Her heart stuttered. "All right. These past 2 months have been the best of my life," Ethan began. "Having you here, working beside you, talking with you every evening, it has made this place feel like a real home instead of just a survival camp." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "But that is the problem. I hired you as an employee, promised you would be safe and respected under my roof. You trusted me with that, and now I find myself feeling things I have no right to feel, wanting things I have no right to want." Diana's breath caught. "What kind of things?" Ethan met her eyes, and what she saw there made her pulse race. "I am falling in love with you, Deanna. Maybe I have been since the moment you stepped off that auction platform. And it is the most selfish, inappropriate thing I could do, given the circumstances. You came here because I gave you freedom, and now I am about to take it away by putting you in an impossible position." "What position?" Deanna whispered, though she thought she knew. "The position where you have to choose between hurting someone who holds power over your livelihood and being honest about your own feelings." Ethan stood abruptly, pacing to the window. If you do not share my feelings, you might feel obligated to pretend you do to keep your job and home. And if you do share them, you might wonder if they are real or just gratitude and circumstance. Either way, it is not fair to you. Diana stood as well, moving to face him. So what are you suggesting? I am suggesting that I finish the addition, give you your own space and privacy. I will continue to pay you fair wages and we will maintain a proper employer-employee relationship. When spring comes, if you want to leave and find other work, I will help you do it. I will write references, provide travel money, whatever you need. His voice roughened. I want you to have real freedom, Diana. Not just legal freedom, but the freedom to choose your own path without being influenced by circumstance or obligation. It was a noble speech, and it made Diana want to shake him. You are an idiot, Ethan Hunter. He blinked in surprise. Excuse me, an honorable, self-sacrificing idiot. Diana stepped closer. Do you really think I have stayed here the past 2 months out of obligation or gratitude alone? That I could not have taken the money you gave me and left for California or Denver? I thought you wanted honest work. I wanted to be near you, Diana interrupted. From that first day when you tore up my contract and whispered that I was free, I knew you were different, special. And every day since has only confirmed it. You are kind and strong and good, and you make me feel safe in a way I have never felt before. Ethan stared at her. Diana, I am falling in love with you too, she said, her voice trembling but clear. Not because you gave me freedom or a job or a roof over my head, but because of who you are. The man who spent his life savings on a stranger. The man who works himself to exhaustion but still takes time to teach me how to split firewood properly. The man who feels guilty about things that were not his fault and tries so hard to make the world a little better. She reached for his hand. If you love me back, please do not push me away in some misguided attempt to give me freedom. Let me choose you freely. For a long moment, Ethan just looked at her, his gray eyes searching her face as if trying to convince himself she meant it. Then slowly he raised his free hand to cup her cheek, his calloused palm gentle against her skin. Are you sure? He asked. Absolutely sure. I have never been more sure of anything, Diana said. Ethan bent his head and kissed her, tentative at first, then deeper when she responded with equal fervor. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Diana melted into his embrace, feeling like she had finally come home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. God help me, Diana, I love you so much it terrifies me. Then we will be terrified together, Diana said and kissed him again. They stood wrapped in each other's arms while the fire burned low and the wind whispered outside. Eventually, they separated enough to sit back down, but this time side by side on the bench, Diana's hand clasped in Ethan's. So what do we do now? Diana asked, feeling giddy and nervous and impossibly happy all at once. I suppose I should court you properly, Ethan said. Though I am not sure how that works when we are living in the same house. We could start with honesty and see where it goes. Diana squeezed his hand. No more sleeping in the barn, for one thing. You can use the addition, but as your room, not as a way to avoid me. I was never avoiding you. I was trying to be honorable. You can be honorable and still sleep under a proper roof. Diana hesitated, then added, and eventually, when we are both ready, we could talk about making this permanent, if that is something you want. Ethan turned to look at her fully. Are you talking about marriage? I am talking about the possibility of marriage someday if we both want it. Diana felt her cheeks heat. Is that too presumptuous? No. Ethan lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. It is exactly what I want, but I want to do this right, Diana. I want to give you time to be sure to know your own heart without pressure. And I want to be able to provide for you properly, not just scraping by on this hardscrabble ranch." "This ranch is enough," Deanna said firmly. "You are enough. Do not make me wait years for some imagined future security. I have already lost too much time to circumstances beyond my control." They talked long into the night, making plans and sharing dreams, stealing kisses between words. When Deanna finally retired to the bed and Ethan to his new room in the addition, both of them lay awake in the darkness, too happy to sleep. The winter that followed was harsh, with snows that piled high against the cabin walls and temperatures that dropped below zero for days at a time. But inside their small home, Deanna and Ethan built a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. They worked together, talked together, and slowly grew into the rhythm of two people building a shared life. Ethan proved to be an attentive suitor, bringing Deanna small gifts when he could. A ribbon from the trading post, a book of poetry he found in Prescott, a pretty stone from the stream. Deanna responded with her own gestures of affection, special meals, a new shirt she sewed by candlelight, her laughter at his stories. They kissed often, tentative explorations that grew bolder as winter deepened. But Ethan was always careful to maintain propriety, always respectful of boundaries. Deanna appreciated his restraint even as it frustrated her. She wanted more, wanted everything, but she understood his need to do things properly. In January, 3 months after their mutual declaration of love, Ethan made the long trek to Prescott and returned with a small box tucked in his coat pocket. That evening, after dinner, he got down on one knee beside Deanna's chair. "I do not have much to offer," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just this ranch, this cabin, and a life that will be more hard work than comfort. But I can promise you will always be cherished, always be free, and always be loved. Deanna Zimmerman, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band, not fancy but solid and real. Deanna felt tears spill down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." Ethan slipped the ring on her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been carefully leashed until now. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. "How soon?" Deanna asked. "When can we marry?" "As soon as the pass is clear enough to get to town safely. Early spring, maybe March if we are lucky." Ethan touched her face tenderly. "Can you wait that long?" "I can wait forever if it means spending it with you," Deanna said, "but I would prefer March." They laughed together, and that night they sat by the fire making plans for their wedding and their future. It would be a simple ceremony, they decided, at the church in Prescott with whatever few friends they had as witnesses. Afterward, they would return to the ranch and begin their life together as husband and wife. The waiting was sweet torture. They were engaged now, committed to each other before God and their own hearts, but Ethan still maintained careful boundaries. He kissed her goodnight at the door to her room, held her hand while they sat by the fire, but went no further. Deanna respected his restraint even as she ached for more. March arrived with muddy roads and melting snow, and Ethan declared the passes clear enough for travel. They made the journey to Prescott on a bright morning when the world seemed to be waking from winter's sleep. At the church, a kind minister named Reverend Thomas agreed to marry them that very afternoon. Diana had no family to stand with her, but Mrs. Henley's daughter, a sweet girl named Mary who had always been kind, agreed to serve as witness. Ethan asked the general store owner, an older man who had known him since he first came to the territory, to stand as his witness. The ceremony was simple and brief, but the words carried weight that made Deanna's breath catch. For better or worse, for richer or poorer in sickness and in health. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with such tenderness that Diana felt tears slip down her cheeks. They emerged from the church as Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Hunter, and Diana marveled at how much her life had changed in 6 months. From the auction platform to this moment of joy, the journey had been hard but worthwhile. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever, though Ethan kept the horses moving at a steady pace. When they finally arrived at the cabin, Ethan scooped Diana up without warning and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing like children. He set her down gently in the center of the cabin, their cabin now, truly theirs together. The laughter faded as they looked at each other, suddenly aware that everything had changed. "I love you, Mrs. Hunter," Ethan said softly. "I love you too," Diana replied, reaching for his hand. That night, they came together as husband and wife, discovering each other with tenderness and growing passion. Ethan was gentle and patient, mindful of Diana's innocence, and she responded to his care with her own fierce love. When they finally lay in each other's arms, Diana felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, stroking her hair. "Not a single one," Diana said, and meant it with her whole heart. The seasons turned, spring giving way to summer and summer to fall. Diana and Ethan worked their ranch together, building it slowly into something sustainable. They sold timber to the logging camps and beef cattle to the army fort, saved money carefully, and invested in breeding stock. The ranch would never make them rich, but it provided a good life. In their 2nd year of marriage, Diana discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Ethan became even more protective, insisting Diana rest more and work less. Diana tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. On a snowy January morning in 1885, Diana gave birth to a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after Ethan's father, and marveled at the miracle they had created together. Samuel was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Rose, then another son named James 2 years after that. The cabin grew with additions to accommodate their growing family, and the ranch prospered through hard work and careful management. Through it all, Diana and Ethan's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, their hard times, their moments of frustration and fear. The West was never easy, and raising children in such a remote place brought challenges neither had anticipated. But they faced everything together, partners in the truest sense. Years passed, children grew, and the ranch transformed from a hardscrabble homestead into a thriving operation. Samuel grew tall and strong, learning ranching from his father. Rose proved to have her mother's quick mind and her father's determination. James was the dreamer, always reading books and asking questions about the world beyond their valley. In the summer of 1895, Ethan's sister Sarah came to visit with her husband and 3 children. It was a joyful reunion, and Diana watched with happiness as Ethan and Sarah talked long into the night, healing old wounds through honest conversation. Sarah had blossomed in her marriage, the shadows mostly faded from her eyes, and she thanked Diana quietly for making her brother happy. "He saved me," Diana said simply. "I was just returning the favor." "You did more than that," Sarah replied, looking at the cabin bursting with children and love. "You gave him a reason to stop punishing himself. You gave him a family and a future. That is no small thing." The children grew and eventually left to forge their own paths. Samuel married a rancher's daughter and started his own place in the valley to the east. Rose became a teacher in Prescott, fulfilling the dream her mother once had. James went to college in California and became a lawyer. writing long letters home about his adventures. Through it all, Diana and Ethan remained at the ranch, growing old together in the place they had built with their own hands. They added grandchildren to their blessings, watching the next generation grow with pride and joy. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Diana's hand and led her outside to watch the sunset over the mountains. They stood in the same spot where he had first shown her the ranch, though much had changed since that day. The cabin was now a proper house, the barn had been rebuilt twice, and the pastures were green with well-tended grass. "I have been thinking," Ethan said, his hair now silver but his gray eyes still sharp, "about that day in Prescott when I bid on your freedom." "What about it?" Diana asked, leaning against him comfortably. "Best $200 I ever spent," he smiled. "Should have paid more." Diana laughed and swatted his arm. "You gave everything you had, you foolish man, and got back more than I could have imagined." Ethan pulled her close. "A wife, a family, a real home, not a bad return on investment." "I suppose I should be insulted, being discussed in terms of financial returns," Diana said, but she was smiling. "You should be grateful I am not better at business or I would have sold you for a profit by now," Ethan teased, then yelped when she elbowed him in the ribs. They stood together watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way and built a life that was more than either had dreamed possible. "I love you," Diana said softly. "As much today as I did 30 years ago. More, maybe." "More," Ethan agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Definitely more." As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Arizona sky, they walked hand in hand back to their home, surrounded by the life they had created together. The journey that began on an auction platform in Prescott had led them here, to this moment of perfect contentment. Diana thought about the girl she had been, desperate and afraid, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. She thought about the cowboy who had given everything for a stranger's freedom, and she thought about the words he had whispered that changed her life forever. "You're free." Freedom had been just the beginning. Love, family, partnership, and home had followed, each building on the foundation of that first selfless act. And now, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, Diana understood that the greatest freedom of all was the freedom to choose love every day for the rest of your days. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations that carried their legacy forward. Children and grandchildren would tell the story of how they met, embellishing it perhaps, but keeping the essential truth at its heart. That sometimes the greatest acts of courage come not from violence or grand gestures, but from simple kindness offered at the right moment to someone in desperate need. As Diana and Ethan settled into their comfortable bed that night, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for 3 decades, she offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. The path had not been easy, but it had been worth every hardship, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. "Ethan," she said into the darkness, "thank you for setting me free." She felt him smile against her hair. "Thank you for choosing to stay." And in the morning, they would wake and begin another day together, adding one more thread to the tapestry of their shared life. The future stretched before them, uncertain as always but faced together, as it had been since that day in 1883 when a cowboy bid everything he had and whispered words that changed 2 lives forever. In the years that followed, the Hunter Ranch became a landmark in the territory. People told stories about the couple who ran it, about their love and their partnership, about the legacy they built in that high valley. When Ethan and Diana finally passed, many years later and within weeks of each other, as often happens with couples who have shared a lifetime, They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, remembering not just the end, but the beautiful beginning and everything that came between. Samuel told the story one more time, making sure the youngest grandchildren understood how their grandparents met, how love can spring from the darkest circumstances, how one act of kindness can change the world. The auction platform in Prescott where it all began was torn down years earlier, replaced by a new town hall. But the story lived on, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of choosing compassion over convenience, freedom over profit, and love over fear. In the end, Diana and Ethan's legacy was not just the ranch or their children, but the example they set. They proved that it was possible to build something beautiful from broken beginnings, that love could heal old wounds, and that sometimes the most important thing you can give someone is the freedom to choose their own path, even if you hope desperately that path leads back to you. And as their great-grandchildren played in the fields they had cleared, road horses descended from the ones they had tended, and grew up in the house they had built, Ethan and Diana's love story continued to inspire, to comfort, and to remind everyone who heard it that there is always hope, even in the darkest moments. Because sometimes freedom is just the beginning. Sometimes it is the foundation on which everything beautiful is built. And sometimes, when you give someone the most precious gift you can offer, you receive in return something even more valuable. A love that lasts not just a lifetime, but for all the generations that follow, carrying forward the light of two people who chose each other freely, loved each other fiercely, and built a legacy that would never be forgotten.